All right, so let me just really quickly reset up my particle thing. So again, this is just in the FX tab. Blah. All right. Particles. Actually, while I'm here, one thing you can do, if you are looking to make a specific object with like stuff shooting out of it, so like if you're, I don't know, trying to like spawn droplets of water or something like that from like hair or something weird like that, just take your object and do end particles emit from object. And what that should do, I'll set this to 500 again. Again, watch the playback speed. And what that is going to do is it's basically going to spawn a crap ton of objects or little particles from this object. By default, I'm gonna pause that because it puts a lot of particles out. By default, this works by basically turning every vertex on the mesh into an emitter, which is why you have this absurdly dense collection of particles coming out of this. So there's sort of alternate ways to make that work. If you go into the emitter, or where am I going? Actually, sorry. All right. Buttons. I'm not clicking. Okay, so this is when I mentioned the surface option under emitter type. This is where you normally use it. So that should, instead of spawning 100,000 million particles from every vertex, it'll just sort of spawn randomly across your object, and now you have like a weird snowing kind of thing. It could be potentially interesting if you needed to do like a salt and pepper shaker or something like that. You could spawn some particles from like a random cap of the salt and pepper shaker. Either way, I'm just going to get rid of that and also the nucleus for now. All right, let's make a new emitter. I'm still working on Omni, and I'm just going to grab the particles, shading. So again, I'll set these to be spheres so you can actually see them. And huzzah. So this is what happened when the computer crashed. So let's see, there's other stuff that you can do. So if you wanted to do sprites, this would be something where you should be able to assign the particles basically, silence. You should be able to assign these particles basically some kind of, renderable texture. And then you'd actually be able to like map in opacity or something like that to these. So if you're looking to do smoke or some other kind of basically like card effect, you could do it with this. You could also make it conceivably like snowflakes or something weird. So that's an option. You can also do numeric, which basically shows you, I think it's the count of particles, like which number particle it is. You can see the numbers sort of get higher the longer you let the sim run. Never found a use for that, it's just kind of funny. So I'll just stick with spheres for now. And what was I about to show you guys? Okay, so it was actually lifespan. So I'm going to go ahead and again set this to sort of random range for the lifespan, anywhere from like 0, I'll say to 4. And go for this. So this should give us, wait, there we go. So this should give us like a pretty decent little trail of particles that are sort of slowly dying. And what you can do once you have this is some kind of interesting-ish texture things that are largely based off the lifespan of these particles. What am I typing? So if we go down again under shading, you can mess with the different opacity scales for different settings, basically. So if you wanted, for example, to have things get more transparent as they age, you could set the opacity scale input to age, and then just mess with the opacity scale. So you notice if we put this down, the older the particle is, it basically gets more transparent. And it'll just sort of automatically calculate that throughout whatever you're doing. You can also set it to different things like speed. In this case, that doesn't do a whole heck of a lot. I find age to be the one that I'm honestly most partial to. And you can also do similar things with color if you wanted to. So again, you could do like age, normalized age, how fast the object is going or accelerating. So I'll just make this ramp and you basically have them turn blue or something crazy. So this could be something where, again, if you did want to make some kind of like little particle water fountain or something like that, you'd have basically these particles that would, you know, get more transparent or like turn a slightly different color or something like as they were shooting out of whatever you're shooting them out of. Bless you. So the other thing that you can look at, and this is probably more relevant for sparks, is, let's make these not blue, is incandescence. And that you can look at with, you can do a few different things with this. So one thing I usually do is age. So the older, basically the older something is, it gets less incandescent. You can also sort of mess with transparency a little bit. Oops, age. So basically, the idea behind this being the younger a particle is, or like the closer it is to that welding spark, it's going to be brighter in terms of the color that it's emitting, and it's also going to be a little bit, it's going to sort of like fade off and die in both incandescence and transparency as it gets older. So this isn't going to be, you know, super spectacular or gorgeous or anything. And actually forget, okay. So this is actually one of those weird things where particles in Arnold don't super like rendering with the sort of default shading and such that you use on them. So that might be something where you can assign it like a different shader, plug different attributes into that. The other thing you can do, and I actually don't, so you can render certain sims with Maya software, and, or is it hardware? Okay, so in this case, and this is like one of the few times that I actually kind of don't hate this as an option, if you were to render these particles with Maya hardware, it is kind of workable depending on what you're doing. So in this case, it's not going to give you motion blur, which isn't ideal, but you can render these. I honestly don't remember off the top of my head. I believe you should be able to just sort of assign this a new material, make it like an AI standard surface shader. Did you do the things? I usually actually don't try to render particles in Arnold. But once you make these a standard surface shader, it'll sort of show up like you might expect. And then you should be good to go through and start changing the color to be whatever you want. If you did want to do something different with your, say, like emission of this object, and you wanted to sort of switch this out, I believe you should be able to go in, unless I'm going very crazy, you should be able to go into your hypershade and sort of hook up the attributes from your particles into those attributes. So, and this is me spitballing because I've actually not tried to do this in a very, very long time. Why is this so freakishly tiny? What are you doing? Okay. Great. Oh, it's still, no. Stop rendering in the background. Oh god. Yeah, it's not, oh god. When did I hit play blast? That's not, question mark, okay. Maya is nuts. So you should, somewhere in here, there is an option basically where you can take the age of this object, and then you should be able to actually map it into the new shader that you've created. So if we grab the age of this, and where is AI standard surface? Oh my. Yeah. All right. Honestly, okay, so here we have like the AI standard surface shader. There should be some stuff in this, like if you wanted to expand that further, where you then gain access to the attributes, but you pretty much have to hook this up in the node editor by dragging the age onto your AI standard surface stuff. I'm honestly not gonna go super crazy into that because I feel like that's just not a great use of time right now. But in terms of actually setting this up to try and have it behave kind of like Sparks, there's, again, a few sort of different things you can do. One is turn up the speed of this. So you notice these are like shooting out way more. The other thing that you can do, depending on how fast or like how long you want the sparks to exist, is turn off, there was the setting under particles for basically, do you want to be affected with dynamic properties or anything like that? So this is going to be, when you first create a particle system, it makes this nucleus here. And this is basically any settings for your world, so like gravity, air density, if you want wind in your scene. If we turn up wind, you'll notice that it should start sort of blowing the particles very, very slightly to one side. So the setting in particles for forces in world, if you turn that off, the particles should just sort of go in like a relatively linear fashion, unless I'm going crazy, which apparently I am. Is that seriously a thing? The other option you have is to just sort of turn off gravity and turn off wind. At that point, for the specific particles, they'll just sort of shoot off into space like this. And again, the faster you make these when they come out of the emitter, the more sort of streaky effects you'll get for the sparks. So usually what you'd want to do for sparks, and honestly for me, it's an issue of getting it to go fast enough to look not insane, is have these really, really super fast particles and give them a very, very short lifespan. What that'll do is it'll get you really like incredibly aggressive motion blur, and the speed of your objects is going to like look pretty decent. That was kind of, again, my biggest problem when I was trying to do sparks was just like making them go fast enough. But that's kind of like a basic spark setup. That's not like an ideal sort of tutorial, I guess. But that's kind of the basics of how I would like approach starting up something like sparks. And then what I would do if you're doing something where, again, you have like a welding torch or something that's like turning on and off, or like touching a particular thing and going like zap, zap, spark, spark. You would just key the emitter itself to just temporarily not emit particles and do short bursts of particles. But that's pretty much all that is really to that, apart from just getting the particles to render in the way that you like. But yeah. Something like weird sort of impromptu bit on particles. Does anybody have any other questions on particles, or like were you thinking of using, yeah?
Have you tried converting particles to polys to do that last term? And it looks pretty cool. I used to make like streams of ketchup and stuff. Pretty well.
That's amazing. I do have another really stupid hack for making like basically filling a glass of milk. I'll get to that later. It has nothing to do with particles, but let me turn the speed of this down a little bit because this is like ridiculous to actually look at. Just like make some glorious particles and set my nucleus back to normal world things. No. Great. Where is it? Particles to polys? Is that a thing? Is it literally just called? Oh yeah, and particles to polygons. Haha, beautiful. That looks insane. But yeah, so this is actually the same thing that you can do with fluid simulations. It's just doing it with particles. So there should, if it's anything like the simulations, there should be somewhere in here where it like allows you to modify the output mesh. So like here, theoretically, like if we turn this threshold up, it's going to go through and drip and make this like really weird sort of gooey effect. So this actually would be a cool thing. Like if you did want to do like a fountain of water, that would actually probably be much easier than trying to run a fluid sim on it. Blobby radius scale, great. But yeah, so I mean that's kind of a fun thing. I do like the sort of convert your sim to mesh. Other thing that might be kind of helpful if you're ever doing this is if you want to not do tries and have it generate a quad mesh, it usually will by default give you this very strange like Minecrafty looking mess. It will then also give you options to smooth that mesh. Basically what this is doing is going through and sort of averaging, oh no, I lost it, now I have to find it again. It's going through and basically sort of doing an average vertices on this So if you did need the quads, you could totally do that. But yeah, that's delightful drippy mesh. Yes, thank you for reminding me you can also do that with particles, because I totally forgot that was a thing. Anyone else have any questions, comments for particles? All right. All right, and I'm just going to run through and do a similar bit with fluids. So for stuff like fire, it's not actually like fluids like you would normally think of, like drinking fluids or like water. It's just, I don't know why Maya calls it fluids, honestly, but basically you can use this for smoke or fire or like other sort of random effects that maybe particles wouldn't necessarily be the best for. So again, in the FX menu, just go up to fluids and just do add 3D container. If you open the settings for this, it'll give you different stuff about like the shape of your object. It'll ask if you want to add an emitter by default. Honestly, I pretty much never look at these settings. I just hit apply and then I just modify from there. So what this is going to do, I'll just hit play on this really quick. And again, just double check my playback speed is set correctly. Add some more frames in here. What this gives you by default is this pretty janky looking awful sim, which is not really good for a whole lot. So before you even really start simming, there's sort of two things that you want to normally change by default. And one of them is the size. So if you need this little emitter box to be a different size, so you would change it with this size option here. What you do not want to do is scale your emitter box like this. These types of simulations work based on what's called voxels, and that is basically just like a 3D pixel. Honestly, think of Minecraft. Minecraft, all of the landscape is pretty much just voxels. But basically what it is like little cubes. So you can see this little grid on the bottom. This is basically, think of this as like one pixel, and it's just sort of projected up through the rest of the piece. If you go and you scale these like this, you get these really, really strange looking, like rectangular, basically pixels. And that's just going to make your sim look really, really strange. So never scale your sim that way, pretty much ever. Unless maybe you, for some reason, need something like this, but like it's going to look really weird. If you need to change the size, again, do it with these size boxes here. I'll give myself maybe a little bit of extra height in this sim. So this is what we have, this like kind of long, tall box. And this should give us something that looks a little bit, it won't look any nicer, it'll just be a better size for what we're trying to go for. So in this case, if we're doing like a candle or something, we have a little bit more room to like have something tall. Now you will notice by default, this is set to basically be a solid box. So imagine like if you lit a smoky candle in a box, there's nowhere for the smoke to go, and it's going to start filling that box. What just happened there? Okay, I think I clicked on something that I shouldn't have. Okay, that's behaving very oddly. Weird. Anywho. Oh, what? What? How did... That's not... I didn't change the base resolution. Why are you changing the base resolution? What? All right. I don't know what just happened to my fluid container. I'm just going to make a new one really quick. Cough. I think I clicked something I shouldn't have. Anyway. So by default, like I said, this is going to go up and hit the top of the box. If you don't want that to be a thing and you just want the sim to sort of continue outwards, you just don't need to render that. You can look at this boundary X, Y, and Z and set it, in this case, if you say none, it'll basically just sort of continue the sim out the top and just not have that interactable surface there. So depending on what you need, that is... Why is it suddenly changing my voxel size? That's insane. Alright, I'm gonna go ahead and just sort of hope that this doesn't blow up. I don't have a lot of hopes in this, because this is literally changing settings without me pressing buttons. Question mark. Really weird. Alright, anyway. So I'm just gonna go ahead and set this back to being a sort of closed-in box for now. The other thing that I wanted to draw your attention to is the resolution itself. So I said that each of these little squares or like voxels is basically like a pixel. So if you want better resolution to your sim, you need to add more voxels or more resolution. You do that with this base resolution here. So normally, if you're trying to do something like halfway decent looking, at a minimum, I would set this to 40. And you'll notice that it's gonna sim a lot slower, but it's also going to look way nicer. So as this hits the surface, you do get a little teeny bit more detail. You can see that nice sort of like smoke ring. But it's going to be a lot more obvious once you start doing some more things to this, the fact that that extra resolution has. Yeah, guys, with me so far? Sweet. Other just random note, if you're so inclined, you can move the emitter around within this sim. Also, do be aware that if you scrub through a simulation, it will break it catastrophically. I'll show you how to get around that later. But again, you can move this. So this would be good. Thinking of, you know, moving a candle, or like if someone's just like smoking a cigarette or something, really, it's like the best example I can think of, where you're just sort of like moving the thing around in space. You would usually just, in that case, for like a cigarette, you would just attach the emitter to the end. And then as the hand sort of waves it around, the emitter would go with it and just sort of keep generating smoke behind it. So that's kind of like the basic setup of these fluid containers. And again, there are different settings for the fluid itself and for the emitter. So in this case, the emitter, if you want to, there's not as much to change with this, in my opinion, as there was on particles. So if you want to, you can add more density per second. So if you set this up to like 20, it's basically going to kick out more of this smoke much faster. There's also some stuff with heat and other things. I'll get to those a little bit later. They're not, strictly speaking, necessary to use immediately, just like off the cuff. There's also other different types of emitter attributes. Again, you can do volume emitters if you want. These you should actually be good to scale. So if you want to, same thing with the Sims, if you want it to emit from like a rectangle, you would just sort of do that, and it would be, you know, this strange sort of rectangle-y shape. You can also do like emit from a surface. So again, if you wanted some kind of strange smoking object, maybe a person running through your scene on fire, you could emit skin directly from their body. Theoretically, this would also work on bound skin. So if you ever did want to set a person on fire, that would be how you would do it. In this case, I'll just leave it as Omni for now. You can also go through and add basically rate, which is just kind of like density. It's just a different way of sort of adding more particles at once. That's honestly most of the settings that I worry for in the emitter itself. Most of the stuff you're going to play with a fluid is in the sort of fluid bounding box, or like the fluid itself. So that's going to be, let me just click this to refresh things. So I'll start with, again, sort of the basic stuff. You can go with different stuff here. I pretty much ignore most of the stuff with this. It's basically just like, how do you want to display this in your viewport? Most of what I mess with is the stuff under dynamic simulation, as well as contents details. So dynamic simulation, you have some extra settings. So when we made the particle emitter, you notice it added that little extra nucleus node. The fluid sims don't have that. They have all of the gravity, viscosity, anything like that is built into the simulation itself. There's also some other stuff. So if you want this to start on a different frame, you can. So maybe if you want it to start 50 frames in your animation, you could set the start frame there. One thing I will recommend is if you're ever doing a sim and you want like a fire raging in the background as soon as your scene starts, set this to something like -30 if you're starting at frame 1, and then put your time slider also to -30. It'll get the fire going before your scene starts, so you don't have a weird thing where there's suddenly no fire and then you get this like weird little bubble that's like shooting flames out of it. In this case, I'll leave this as frame 1 for now. But yeah, so there's a bunch of other stuff in here that you can kind of mess with. High detail solve is going to be, do you want more detail in your sim? Not a terrible idea to turn that on if you're doing something final. I'm going to leave this turned off for now. And then this forward advection, no idea how you actually pronounce that. But this also usually will do like a little bit of extra sort of like swirling detail and stuff like that in your sim. Honestly though, without both of those options, you can still get pretty nice looking stuff. So, again, still in the fluid shape, most of what I look at is the contents details. And anything that you have in the contents method, so like density, velocity, temperature, etc., you have tabs for, so like density, velocity, turbulence, temperature, etc. So this is just sort of more different ways to control your sims. You can scale the density here as well for the whole sim if you were looking for something like a little bit softer. You can also mess with the buoyancy, which is basically like if you set this negative, your sim is going to drop instead of going upwards. Kind of cool for like angry misty mountains or like mist rolling around in mountains or something like that. The other things that you can mess with, if you set buoyancy to 0, your sims just sort of idle here and do nothing, which is a little bit weird. The other two things that you can look at are dissipation and diffusion. Off the top of my head, it's a pretty subtle it's a pretty subtle difference. Dissipation is basically going to be, if you set this up, the particles are basically going to die or disappear from your fluid container the older they get. So they're not being like redistributed, they're literally just dying and vanishing from your sim. Diffusion, on the other hand, is basically going and it's, instead of getting rid of the particles, it's just slowly dispersing them throughout your scene. So you can see that the longer the sim runs, it's sort of filling in the bottom of the box very, very slowly as those particles sort of creep throughout your scene. So this is, in and of itself, not super interesting of a thing to mess with. It can sort of affect some of the stuff that you use later, so it's good to be aware of the difference. Does that make sense, the sort of difference between the two? Cool. Apart from that, there's some different stuff. So there's a lot of different settings for pressure in fluid sims. Think of pressure if you have an elevator with 30 people crammed into it, and then you open the door, there's going to be a stream of people flooding out of that elevator as fast as they possibly can go. That's pretty much the same thing as pressure in a simulation where the higher the pressure, if the particles are denser, they're going to push apart a little bit more. There's also a setting for that under temperature. So like the hotter it gets, the faster the particles push apart. That's pretty much all pressure is. And you can mess with the pressure threshold a little bit. That's basically just at what point does the pressure take effect where it starts really like pushing away from the other particles. Apart from that, there's like different stuff here which I honestly don't super crazy play with all that much. You can see as you scrub through these values, you get some like kind of interesting, strange results. And all of these values, again, are keyable, so if you do need to mess with these or like change these dynamically, you can totally do that throughout your sim. That's actually a lot of fluid stuff. It's almost never set it up once and just let it run. It's like, no, I need to constantly modify this to do whatever I need it to do. So I'm actually going to go through really quickly and add, heaven help me, I'm gonna try 60. And I'll make this a little bit shorter. So I'm just gonna move my emitter down in this a tiny bit and just, all right. So more resolution, lower emitter, and doing whatever. So the other settings where things sort of start to get fun with this type of thing is, in my opinion, when you hit the velocity tab. And what that is that you can add some like extra swirl and like visual interest into your simulation. So it takes something immediately that goes from being like pretty boring to lots of like crazy little like interesting details, like fluffy stuff happening. This is usually where I start going in and being like, all right, what if this thing didn't just immediately fill with smoke? I'll just go ahead and sort of dissipate that. So that basically, instead of like hitting the top of this box, it's sort of disappearing before it gets there. But again, that swirl under the velocity tab, it does really pretty things, I think. You can also go through and add some noise to this. I am less partial to noise. I feel like it ends up just sort of looking a little bit strange and jittery. But it is there if you need it, if you just need to like put a little bit of extra variation in your stuff. There's also turbulence. So velocity is basically, I think of this as like a sort of internal thing happening within the fluid itself, or like within the little fluid stream. Turbulence is basically sort of environmental factors that are occurring within this fluid shape, if that makes any sense. So if we turn on turbulence, this is going to function basically as wind. So think of like wind sort of flowing around through this box. It's going to affect your shape and sort of like throw it around in the space. So it's depending on what you need. This can be really good for like making candles flicker or something like that. But it's basically just like blowing your stuff around. You can also mess with the frequency. Kind of behaves like a noise texture a little bit, where it'll sort of change the way that turbulence is working a little bit, as well as the speed. So you can make like super crazy fast turbulence, and that'll do some pretty weird stuff sometimes. But yeah, so turbulence tab is going to be for sort of global effects like wind on your sim. Velocity is more just, I would like a little bit of extra swirl and detail within the sim itself without it blowing all over the place. So I'm just going to kind of leave this as it is for now. I'll set swirl up because I like swirl a lot. And that is honestly like a lot of the basic sort of making an initial sim. I'm going to really quickly throw a skydome light in here and render this. So rendering sims, usually, especially if it's a huge sim in the frame, or if you're like inside your sim, your render times are most definitely going to go up. Let's see here. So by default, this is how it renders. It looks pretty darn gross. There are settings that you can use to make that look less incredibly trashy, and they are kind of similar actually to the particle settings a little bit. So if you go in again to your fluid shape and scroll down to shading, there's different options here. So you can mess with the transparency of your sim. Depending on what you need, you can make your sim glow if you're so inclined, which sometimes has different render effects depending on what you're doing. Most of what I look at for this is color, incandescence, and opacity. So I'll start with color and opacity. They work exactly the same way as the green smoke. They work exactly the same way as particles. Guys, we're doing Christmas smoke today. It's going to be amazing. So if you set this to constant, it's not really going to do much of anything interesting. It's going to pick whatever it is at the value of 1. And now we have hideous green smoke. Where it gets interesting, you can set it to like a Y gradient. So if you scroll through that, you can see it's kind of like green at the bottom and red at the top, which isn't necessarily what you want. It's definitely better than nothing. It gets really interesting though when you start setting it to something like density or temperature. So you can see with this, it's doing like this really weird sort of green ball in the center close to the emitter. And then the farther out you get where the smoke is less dense, it's turning red. You can also use the input bias to sort of mess with where that change is happening, basically, in your smoke. So that's the first thing, is sort of messing with color. And again, you can do different stuff. You can do speed if you wanted to. So you can actually see, okay, and here's actually a great example of the viewport often does not look anything like the render. Which is, incidentally, why I always suggest as you're modifying these to have a test render going on the side. But you can see, if you look in the viewport, that there's a sort of like really, really fast strip going up this, where it's like going faster, and then kind of red all around. So it can be an interesting way to like actually just view your sim. But in this case, I think density looks pretty reasonable, so I'm just going to kind of do that. And then you can also play with opacity. And this is by default set to be based on density. So if you take that up at 0 density, the whole sim container is full, which looks insane. You can also mess with the overall opacity of the whole thing. Or my personal preference is if you click on this little arrow thing, it'll expand your opacity display. And what you can do is go in and really sort of push the way that this is sort of rendering or viewing your stuff. So I like to go in and just add a bunch of crazy spikes to everything. And you'll notice that as you do that, like if we look at it's significantly more obvious on the render, but as we do this crazy dip in opacity, you get this really, really hard little line in your sim. And if you play with your sim enough and you play with the opacity enough, you can do this to really like pull a lot of crazy detail out of the inside of that sim. So I'm just going to go ahead and just sort of add some more random little jittery areas to this opacity. This is just like my weird thing that I'm kind of obsessed with doing, but you can see it is going through, and I mean, this looks a little bit insane. But we do have this like really, really crazy effect here where you get a lot of that like really weird swirling. And then if you mess with the input bias a little bit, you can sort of change how exactly that's behaving to sort of pull more or less detail from your sim as you want. That makes sense. So in this case, I would like some more detail around the sort of center of the sim. So I'll poke in some more stuff there. So I'm just going to call that halfway decent. It looks really weird, but I'll call that decent for the sim for now. And again, okay, this is going to sound really dumb, but this looks like a unicorn head with like this and like an eye and a horn. Anyway, but again, test render on the side as you're doing things. I will also note that doing simulations, rendering simulations, is one of the few times I will not recommend per se, but like say you can totally use Maya software. It does a very decent job converting largely what you see in your viewport to a simulation. So in this case, we've not set this up to be rendered with Maya software, but it does render very, very quickly, and it still does a good job of getting all of the detail in that sim. So potentially if you were doing something small like a candle flame or something like that that's not having crazy interactions with the rest of your scene, like casting shadows or, you know, exploding light everywhere, you could totally just render that in Maya software and just comp it on top of your final render. I'm not gonna lie, that's what I did for most of my simulation class. So that's the basics of sort of setting up a fluid sim and texturing it. Does anybody have any questions before I get to the sort of additional things that you can do to this? Cool. All right, so additional stuff is basically going up and adding some other things you can play with, basically. So if we look at, usually you'll add like temperature and fuel. So when you turn these on, set them to dynamic grid. That's basically calculating these things dynamically with within your whole fluid container, basically. If you do gradient, it's going to do sort of, again, like a bottom-up kind of thing. Dynamic is going to give you the most dynamic effect, which sounds so dumb when I say it out loud. But turn that on, so let's turn both of them on. This is where you'd get a little bit more control if you're looking at like the fluid emitter. There was some stuff for like how much heat do you want to add per second, how much fuel do you want to add. So basically what this is it's almost like heat, spark, flame. So fuel at some point is basically stuff that is going to combust at a certain point, usually when it reaches a certain temperature. So this is just sort of adding fuel in the emitter. By default, it defaults to 1 and 1. But you can play with these to make really weird effects like explosions, where imagine you have like a can of gasoline and you hold a match near it. At some point, like when the heat from that match touches the fuel, it's going to ignite it, and all of the fuel is just going to be like all at once. Every time I try to demo that live, I can never get it set up right. It's a little bit fiddly, but if you can make it work, it makes some really, really interesting effects and like really weird explosions. Most of what I'm going to focus on is just sort of temperature. So you can mess again with the temperature scale. You can do some things where the buoyancy of this, so like basically the hotter something is, the faster it rises. So that's going to be useful for doing something like flame, where again, like hot air literally does rise. And then if you mess with the buoyancy of the actual simulation, wait, where was it? Get some interesting mushroom cloud effects. But there's like a crazy thing you can do where basically like you have your sim come up and then it goes through and it kind of like comes up, cools down, and then like curls back around like actual smoke would be. I'm not gonna lie, off the top of my head, I don't entirely remember where that setting is. But you can still mess with this again, so like pressure. Do some really weird stuff with that for temperature, where like the hotter it is, the more it wants to sort of push away from itself. Mess with the pressure threshold. That's kind of goes hand in hand with pressure in the sense of this is the point at which it starts pushing more aggressively away from itself. So if you set that higher, usually it'll get like a little bit denser before sort of expanding outwards. And then again, you can mess with dissipation. So for heat, that's going to be kind of the same thing as the density, where dissipation, the heat vanishes. Diffusion is the heat just sort of slowly fills this container until you've built yourself a strange little oven. And again, you can add turbulence if you want to that. Where it gets kind of interesting is being able to control incandescence with the temperature. So now that we've actually added temperature in here, you can see actually that our simulation is kind of changing. Whereas previously it was, so I can turn this off. No, okay. So previously it was red and green, and now it's sort of yellow in the middle and like red as it goes out. And basically what this is it's visualizing how hot this simulation is. So you mess with the input bias same way you did everything else. But this is a decent way to make sort of glowing fire, or if, again, like the hotter something is, you know, you'd have that little red flame in there. You can do some weird stuff sometimes if you want to maybe do like a propane flame or something like that, where you could change this to be blue instead, and then it would look, it would give you that sort of weird like artificial fire look. Where's blue? Click the button. Great. Buttons. Done. Great. So now you have that like tiny blue spark in there. It's a little bit like strange, strange looking the way I've set that up, but kind of mess with that to do, you know, whatever you need. But when you do start having temperature in there, it gives you a lot more control, I think, over the sort of how this thing behaves. You get a lot more sort of interesting billowy effects, and it also gives you more control over the shading itself. And all of this should render in Arnold or Maya software. So it's like an interesting flame. But yeah, so I mean, this is obviously rendering really, really slowly, but you can see kind of like how interesting that is. And then the only other, ooh, lordy. The only other thing to sort of mention with incandescence is if anything tending more towards like gray or black is going to be less incandescent. So if we made this black value just white, what that would do is basically make everything a little bit glowy, tending towards white. If we took this blue and we made it darker, it's going to render as less incandescent. So if we turn that off to black, in this case it does actually sort of change the color a little bit, but basically like you can kind of use this in conjunction with opacity to change sort of how glowy your object is. I don't know a better way to describe that. And again, this all renders fairly decently with Maya software if you need to. In this case, it's probably going to look really insane. But this is, I don't know, I think it's actually really, really easy to get pretty nice looking sims out of Maya software, so I do sometimes render in this anyway. But yeah, that is pretty much my bit on like actually making sims. Does anybody have any questions about that? Okay. The only other thing I wanted to go over, there's two things with sims, and they are both very, very important for doing pretty much most kinds of sims. And that is caching. Caching is like super crazy important. If you do sims, you should know about caching. So I do have on the student resources Google Drive this little document, caching info for Maya 2018. Also works on other versions of Maya, but it just has a bunch of different information about caching, how to set up caching, some additional things you can do with the caches, but basically what a cache is a way to save your simulation so that you can render it properly, and that's a big one, is being able to render it properly. And it also makes viewing things in your viewport a little bit faster. You're not going to have to like wait for your sim or like have your sim blow up. So again, I mentioned that it was really important to have that you not scrub through your viewport. If you do that with a sim, at some point it will break down pretty much completely. Like you can't go backwards. If you just click forwards and you don't scrub, it's like, I don't know what's happening, and it will blow up like this. This is why it's really important to sort of save your stuff later. So to make a cache, you basically, still in your FX tab, go to End Cache, create new cache, and just do one for Maya Fluids. Honestly, there's some options in here. There's like 2 that I pay attention to. One is actually where you want the file to be saved. Here. Usually I leave cache format and file distribution just as they are. And then the only other things I usually pay attention to are sort of cache time range. So you could do from render settings, you could do based on the time slider, or you could manually input a start and an end frame. So I'll just do 1 to 120. And then if you want to, you can go through and save, say like I'm actually not really using fuel on this, so I could turn fuel off if I wanted to save some space. Caches take up a lot of room on your computer. In the case of being safe, I usually just save everything. And then you can go through if you want to and say, I'm going to evaluate every second frame, so that would be like frame 1, 3, 5, 7. You can also not save every evaluation. So normally I leave this at 1 because that's what I need. If you wanted to do some kind of slow motion animation with like a fire explosion in it, and you needed that fire explosion to not look terrible, what you can do is set this to like every 0.25 frames. And that is going to basically save you 4 frames or 4 files for every single frame, but it's going to allow you to really go into your sim and like look at it in slow-mo without it exploding. In this case, I'm still just going to leave this at 1. And I'll hit apply, select your fluid, do the things again. Great. It's going to start scrubbing through this and basically playing through it, and it should generate, this is like basically Maya just calculating your cache. If you look in the default Maya project folder where I've saved this, if you don't already have a cache tab in your folder, it will generate one automatically, but just go into End Cache, Fluid, I've called my cache here, and you'll see that for every frame we have a file with some random information in it. You can save multiple caches and sort of switch between them. Again, that's sort of all in the doc. I imagine most of you won't need to do that, so I'm not really going to go over that in super crazy detail. But what this allows us to do is, you'll notice we can go backwards through our sim, and you can pretty much scrub through this in real time without it blowing up aggressively. So it's convenient for just viewing in the viewport. If we go past our cache, you'll notice it breaks down again entirely. So usually you'll only sort of do what you need. But apart from being convenient in the viewport, and this is where caching is super, super important, is for rendering. If you do not cache your simulation and you're rendering, say, frames 1 to 100, your sim breaks on frame 50, or your render breaks on frame 50. If you try to start it from frame 50, your simulation will not render properly and it will break. So if you don't cache something and you render it, it goes from frame 1, calculates your sim, renders, frame 2, calculates your sim, renders. If you start from frame 50, it doesn't know what to do from that if you do not have a cache. So if your render goes down, you're going to have to re-render everything to get your sim looking the way it should, which is obviously a waste of time. The other important thing is that if you render, and this is so dumb, if you render on different computers without a cache, they can potentially calculate your sim differently. So if you render frames 1 through 50 on computer A and 51 through 100 on computer B, that frame 50 to 51 may look completely different depending on the computer you're on, which is why it is very, very important to have a cache. Yes?
Can you do this with NClock and particles and stuff too?
Yes, you can.
When you're saying like replacing frames and stuff and like not lining up, last term I had a project it was like I had to render a few hundred frames and like the first 2 got replaced and I had to do the whole thing all over again. It was terrible.
Oh no, that sucks.
So
Yeah.
I'm definitely gonna do that next time.
Yeah, caching is great. It's also not a terrible idea. If you have something you're like, that looks kind of decent, I kind of don't hate that. You can cache it and just like save caches in case you change settings and you screw everything up, and then you have backup to go back to. But yeah, so that's caching and pretty much how to set one up. Does anybody have any questions on that? Okay. Again, very important, know about caching. Let me double check my notes really quick. I feel like that was actually most of what I had, except for like one thing. Oh yes, okay. So that was actually pretty much most of the stuff I had for you for Sims. There is a sort of weird bonus thing, which you totally spoiled, but it's okay. And that is basically turning this into polygons, which again, we've kind of already done. But if you grab your fluid container and go to modify, convert, somewhere, fluid to polygons, it will make this really goofy shape that you can scrub through, and this one gives you generally like stranger looking shapes than the particle sim. So honestly, I've never found a huge use to do this in practice. There are sort of settings, again, if you go into your fluid, there's this output mesh tab, so I would usually convert this to quads and then smooth it a few times. It'll make it look way less trashy and broken. And since this is cached, it does scrub really nicely. You can do sort of an interesting thing if you like scrub past your cache or like do this. You basically get like this insane rain of Dippin' Dots. If for some reason you needed this, you could potentially just deliberately break a simulation and make this effect. But you can do some silly stuff where you go through and, all right, if you go into your cache, so once you make a cache, when you're clicking on your fluid container, it should show up here as like, here is my cache. If you turn that off, it'll basically not use your cache. So now I'm able to go through and like edit settings, edit additional settings in my cache. So the reason I wanted to do that is just to be goofy and show you guys, I promised you like a crappy filling of a milk jar or something like that. This is like the cheapest, dumbest, easiest way to do that, is just move your emitter to the top of your fluid container, go to your fluid shape, scroll down, set buoyancy all the way down, and it's gonna start basically dropping fluids randomly in this container. It's gonna look a little bit weird, probably too much turbulence to actually be believable falling milk. But if you go through and you set dissipation up to 0, it's just gonna go and it's just gonna keep falling until it hits the bottom of that container, where it will start sort of filling the glass and basically just like filling up your container with awkward simulation. The temperature is making things a little bit weird right now, but it is potentially, if you were just looking for like a really non-realistic, like here is a splash of water in a glass, conceivably you could do something like this. You can also create objects and have them actually interact with your fluid, so like you could make a real glass or like a pitcher and like dump your fluid into that. At this point, I mean, this is basically, ugh, that's a gross looking mesh. That's really awful looking. At this point, this is just a regular mesh. You should be good to render this with Arnold or whatever other thing. And I think they actually usually do have milk presets for some reason in your textures. So that is my silly filling of a milk jar demo. This is also could be good potentially for either really stylized smoke or, depending on the settings you choose, you can make this look really similar to a lava lamp. So you could also potentially use it for that. Anywho, I have never seen it destroy the bottom of a mesh this thoroughly before. That is truly impressive. That was actually pretty much all the stuff that I had for Sims. Does anybody have any questions on that? Or anything else? All right, in that case, I'm going to